morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. Welcome to the electronic June 8th, 2020 Corporate Service Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Bradley Marks, and I'm the chair of the committee. At this time, I've been advised by the clerk that the members of the committee are in attendance, and they are the Vice Chair, Councillor Jane Hurst, Councillor Derek Giberson, Councillor John Neal, Councillor Brian Nicholson, and the Mayor, His Worship, Dan Carter. In order to ensure adequate physical distancing, all members of council and staff will be participating remotely. For those viewing the web stream today, I can confirm that only I, Vice Chair, and City Clerk support staff, and a member from IT are in the chamber. The clerk has muted all microphones. In order to speak, please advise the Council Committee Coordinator via the WebEx chat function, and I will recognize you by name, and you may unmute your microphone. As a reminder, although WebEx has a raise hand feature, we will not be using it for this meeting. If you have a motion, it must be submitted in writing and sent to the Council Committee Coordinator and Deputy Clerk to their respective email addresses in order for it to be displayed in our meeting. Please do not type in the chat function, as it cannot be displayed from there. In keeping with the practice established by Council, unless a recorded vote is requested, I will ask if any member is in opposition to the motion before us at the time. If you are in opposition to the motion, please unmute your microphone and state your name and that you are opposed. I ask everyone for their patience, and we continue to work with this new technology. I will now turn. Councillor McConkey and Councillor Tito Dante Marin Petrie are in attendance. Good morning, councillors. Good morning. Oh, I'm sorry, and Councillor Gray, I'm being advised, is also with us. Good morning, Councillor Gray. Good morning. I will now move on with the agenda, members of the committee. Looking to the clerk, are there any additional agenda items? Seeing none, thank you very much. I will now electronically turn to the members of the committee. Are there any declarations of a pecuniary interest of any items before us today? We confirm that there are none. Thank you very much. This morning we have no presentations. We have no delegations. There is no correspondence requiring action. There are no referrals from council and standing committees and reports from advisory committees. There are no reports, motions requiring action. So I will move the committee's attention to the public consent agenda. And I will now look for members of the committee, all items for debate. And Madam Clerk, can you facilitate that, please?
Good morning, it's Councillor Giberson. I'd like to pull Corp 2017, please.
Very much. That's Corp 2017. Madam Clerk.
Councillor John Neal, 2018.
Madam Clerk, recognizing Corp 2018 to be pulled. Members of the committee, are there anything else? Seeing none. Vice Chair Hurst, could you please propose the motion for the committee to consider?
That all items listed under the heading of public consent agenda for the June 8th, 2020 Corporate Services Committee meeting be adopted as recommended, with the exception of those pulled for the discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Hurst. Any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, thank you. That carries. We now move to Corp 2017, and I will ask Councillor Giberson to please introduce a motion for the members of the committee to consider.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Marks and members of the committee. I'd be happy to move the motion that is on the recommendation.
Thank you very much. The recommendation is on the floor. Councillor Giverson, the floor is
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair Marks, and good morning, all. I'm just going to make a few comments on the report and the strategy that's come forward with the report. And I wanted to pull this item in order to draw attention to the importance of this IT strategy. There are pieces of this report that show that we are doing a good job, and there are pieces of this report that indicate that if we are going to be very frank today, and I think that that's our responsibility as a municipality and as a committee and as a council eventually when this goes to council, if we're going to be very frank, there are areas that we lag significantly, and I think it's not sufficient for us today to simply pass this motion and move on. I think that we need to make sure that we are putting as much emphasis and spotlight on what is contained in this report and the need for council, not just in this year, but in years following, to ensure that this is resourced, that it is backed, that it is supported, and that it becomes embedded in our corporate culture. There are significant gaps in our IT structure and investment, and there are some very clear messages that come from this report. There are a few that I would like to highlight this morning, and I'm just going to find the page number for any who are interested in some of the highlights that I again think that we need to make sure that we're well aware of as a committee and as a council. So on page 24 of the agenda, and that's page 17 of the report itself, in the first bullet point at the end of the paragraph, I'll just read the paragraph. There's greater demand than there is capacity for technology and business technology projects at the city. An estimated 75% of IT branch time is allocated to operational work, leaving just 25% of the resources available for project work. The IT branch is set up to operate, not innovate. And that phrase gets used multiple times throughout this report. What I've seen in reading through it is that they're our team, who, to be clear, are doing a great job. They have been put in a position where they're managing the day-to-day and unable to empower our organization, which ultimately serves our residents and serves our community, because they're in no position to be able to innovate and push beyond just that day-to-day operation. And that concerns me. I look to the next bullet point, and I note that the comment here says that the city has undoubtedly demonstrated a willingness to invest in new technology, and I think we're all aware at this point of the investments and time going into Maximo and CityView and such, but does not appear to invest in the necessary human capital to successfully and effectively implement and sustain these solutions, and thus fails to realize the full return on investment. So it's notes like this that I find throughout the report, and things like that are repeated in different places. If you turn to page 27, which is page 20 of the report, at the very bottom, at the end of the last bullet point, and at the end of the final sentence, where it says the city, compared to peers, is under-resourcing business transformation projects. The practice of funding project staff and backfilling project resources for projects has only recently been experimented with and is not standard practice. We need to make this standard practice. And again, I can't back at the history of IT studies in this city, you can go back over a decade. I believe that the first one that I saw referenced in here was one that was released in 2010. There have been needs that have been identified for a decade and longer that keep getting, again, under-resourced, I would say. And I hope that this council will see how important this is and make sure that this is the last time that we see ourselves in this condition, and that we're pushing this forward. And there are a few points that I saw in the report that reference in particular to the way that it is stretching and frustrating staff. I would expect that there has been an impact on staff morale from what I'm reading in here. They are frustrated because they know that there are ways that we can do better, and we can achieve at the level that we know is available to us, because comparators, other municipal comparators, show that it is doable. And I don't want to see that become a drag on the IT staff, which we now have numbers that show that we have understaffed for years there. But it's the missed potential for our municipality, and it doesn't make any sense for us to be a municipality with two leading post-secondary institutions in the field of technology here in our city, and yet for our municipality to be a latent follower. So a lot of this might not be exciting reading, and a lot of this might be at a level of technology that sometimes goes over the head of those of us who aren't specialists, and I'm not a specialist. But I think that we need to grab onto the parts that don't require the ability for business transformation and service delivery to our community. We're still using, in some cases, PDF forms where you have to print it off, use a pen to write out whatever it is you're filling out, and then either physically drop it off or scan it and email it back. And this is something that really we could have fixed and should have fixed years ago. And I just use that one example because it's one that I've observed. And I want to be very clear about one thing. This is not an aspersion I am casting on our staff. I truly believe that they are doing great work with the resources that they have. And I do want to point to some of the high points. One of the notes that the consultant makes is,
Councillor Garrison, just
Yes.
be mindful of Rule 25.3, 10 minutes to each motion. You have 1 minute left, so your final thoughts on this would be appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time notification. So I do want to point to a positive highlight that's on page 23 in the agenda package, or page 16 of the report. And if you look at the second bullet point, the city has done some excellent, indeed leading work in the customer-facing layer and in delivering some digital services, creating a strong foundation for future expansion of digital services. So I want to be clear that I'm not communicating all doom and gloom here. I think that this highlights the fact that we do have the potential to not just be successful in our use of IT in the corporation, but that we can be doing an excellent job and doing leading work. So how do we make sure that we are properly resourced to lead in other areas? And that would be my urging to committee and to council, that we make sure that going forward with this and with budgets that are going to be in front of us, that we make sure we do not drop the ball here to the enormous disservice of our staff and our community. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giberson. I see I only have one councillor on the speakers list from the visiting side. I will now turn to other members of the committee. If they would like to speak, please unmute and the clock will begin. Hearing none, I will recognize Councillor McConkey. Thank you. Councillor McConkey.
Morning, Chair Marks. I have a few
Morning.
questions to ask about the report. It's very interesting, very thorough. But if I could direct my questions, I guess it would be to Commissioner Adams about the report.
I confirm Commissioner Adams is listening, so go ahead with your questions, and I'm sure it will be facilitated to the correct staff member. Thank you.
Thank you. So I understand it was the Perry Group. It actually interviewed members of council and staff informing this rather lengthy report. But this is not the actual strategic plan, is it? I mean, when we say that we're recommending to approve it in principle, the actual strategic information and technology plan will be something not written this way, like a report. It will be an actual strategic plan, will it not?
Commissioner Adams?
It's strategic plan.
So when we're approving this in principle, we're saying this is the City of Oshawa's official information and technology strategic plan? I'm sorry, I'm a little surprised because it just seemed to be rather chatty and wordy and talking about we did this and we did that, and I don't see action plans, priorities. Maybe if I could start with the recommendation, recommendation number 2, that talks about the future operating and capital budget considerations as outlined in the detailed work plan to be presented to council when appropriate for future budget. I understand and appreciate Councillor Giberson's points because a lot's been brought to our attention, the deficiencies and what needs to be addressed. But the number one thing I think with strategic plans that we're planning for the future is to make sure that we have strategy and measuring processes. And I think that just saying when appropriate, I've looked at other municipalities' strategic plans, and they basically say, once a year you have a survey, report annually or quarterly. I think that was one. I had a problem with that where it says where appropriate when it's not spelled out clearly. But I did have a few other questions, if you don't mind. I'm surprised that actually was the Perry Group invited? Was it part of the maybe terms of reference when this was contracted to the Perry Group to make a presentation to council at some point? Because we haven't had any presentation by the Perry Group.
Commissioner Adams?
Through you, through you, Chair Marks, to Councillor McConkey. So there's a couple of questions there. So this strategic plan is similar to what other municipalities have a strategic plan. So, and with regard to the detailed work plan, that starts on 112, page 112. Basically, a 5-year plan, just so that members of council are aware. So Ben Perry, who's also on the line. So you asked whether or not in the document, the RFP, whether or not the Perry Group would be doing a presentation to council. Indeed, that was part of it, but due to circumstances beyond our control, that is not happening. But Mr. Perry is on the line, is able to answer any questions that you may have. You also mentioned annual reporting, and definitely the Perry Group has indicated that we would be reporting to council on an annual basis, and I believe the language in the document said between budgets. So I would expect June, every June we would come back so that council would know where our progress is on this strategic plan. So the Perry Group has also provided on page 105 and 106 some KPIs, so those will also be established.
Councillor McConkey?
Am I back? Thank you.
You are.
Thank you. It's good to hear that Mr. Perry is here with us today. I would think that we might have introduced him right at the beginning of this report. And, you know, the fact that it's about information and technology, you know, the ability now that we have to have the electronic participation by the public and our consultants. So I just am surprised that we don't have maybe a little bit more of a guidance from Mr. Perry in what the priorities are. I know the work plan's there, but it's not basically stating the priorities other than that we should be completing what we've started, of course. But Mr. Perry, if I could ask you, did you talk to KPMG when they did their report about the milestones for Maximo and City View, which was on our agenda last council meeting, and see the problems that they have had? Was that something that you were made aware of?
Before you answer, good morning, Mr. Perry. Good morning, Mr. Perry. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
If you would like Councillor McConkey to repeat her question, please go ahead. If not, we will anticipate your answer. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes, we did. We were in contact with KPMG and we reviewed a number of reports. We reviewed a number of background material from lots and lots of sources. So yes, that was one of the things that we discussed as part of our discovery process. The report itself does sort of focus on 5 priority areas and sort of brings forward a set of recommendations which I think lay out a set of priorities. There is quite a lot of material to review in terms of the background of the situation, and I'll acknowledge it's a long report, but we felt that it was important to be clear about the situation. So, yeah, I think that's probably what I want to say.
Thank you. Mr. McConkey?
Thank you. It is a long report, over 100 pages. When I look at City Mississauga, I think they have 30 pages. A couple others, you know, a dozen, 20 under. It just seemed to me not to read like a strategic plan with the number of times, like I've mentioned, and you've probably to your process, but as a formula for the city's strategic plan, future plan, I just found that I thought maybe it would be coming back. I didn't realize this was the final version, but now that's been made clear to me. If I could ask you just some specifics, you referred to the partners that we already have, E-Solutions, Bang the Table, and CANA. I'm not familiar with CANA. And what is that involving?
That's your CRM system. It used to be called, you might know it as Lagan. It's the owner or the vendor of that solution.
Councillor McConkey?
Thank you very much. I didn't realize that was Lagan. So they've been purchased by CANA. That's the head company. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, that's correct.
You mentioned, you know, the number of our employees compared to some of the other municipalities that you cited, and I think that's on page 27. You were talking about our total staffing costs as being 2.5 million for the 23 full-time equivalents, and then you were comparing them to Kitchener, who has 61 full-time equivalents. You were saying, though, you didn't bring in those numbers to that, I mean, the numbers you had in another section of your report, but in that paragraph on page 26, then when you compare the two, Oshawa to Kitchener, you're saying that the city of Oshawa is, you know, approximately half the staffing costs. But, yeah, it's half the staffing costs because Kitchener is 5.8. But Kitchener has basically almost 3 times as many employees. So it just to get an accurate comparison, I just didn't think it took it to that next comparison stage. But when you talked about the IT the City of Oshawa's IT team currently providing service based on personal goodwill of management and staff rather than a formalized model of support. Could you elaborate on that? Because are you saying that they're being called on weekends or that sort of thing? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's correct. The city doesn't have a formalized support arrangement. Yeah, essentially, IT staff are called at weekends and in the evenings to resolve problems. We don't have a formal call-out policy or arrangements for those for that service. So it's on a sort of best efforts basis. But of course, the city operates 24/7. So primarily, the IT services are available during office hours. And a number of service areas will tell you that that's not really enough. They need service outside of those hours.
Councillor McConkey?
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that because counselors get a lot of calls on the weekends and we're looking for follow-up at that time. But I think maybe the type of work that you're indicating on that page might be more of a technical nature with problems with the system, or is this actually assisting with follow-up through Lagan, the Service Oshawa, and how to get in touch with people? Is that?
No, these are technical problems. So let's say the fire department runs into a problem with their dispatching system, or the recreation folks run into a problem with their room booking and facility booking systems outside of hours. These are the types of things that we're talking about.
Thank you. So if I could refer to page 35, which is 28 in your report, to me this was something that just really stood out that we should be, I think, putting in right at the top of that work plan is monitoring project budgets against the actual expenditures. I'm glad you highlighted it, but it's not really highlighted the point that I would like to see. But there's also the other aspect of what you've written in your report about data management, and if I could refer to the actual wording of it. Sorry to take a second to find. Yeah, I think it's on the same page. Sorry, page 40.
Councillor, just for reference, you're on page 28 of the report, 35 of the agenda. Is that correct?
Right, I was there, and I'm going to flip over to page 40 of the report, page 33 of the agenda. The last paragraph. Although IT is a key player, that is not specifically an IT issue. Going on into the next line. For a detailed list of recommendations, the organization as a whole should consider, and then it says, if wanting to move forward to substantiate a data management program. So it's sort of putting data management kind of like on the back burner. That's how I read it. Mr. Perry, if you could clarify that for me, please. Where does data management fall into this?
So one of these things, there's two parts to this. One is referring to some recommendations that came forward as part of the Information and Records Management Report, which I understand pointed out that there are a number of baseline pieces of work that needed to be done, which were a priority, and that's where your sort of resource investment would be going, and that data strategy and GIS strategy and building out data warehouses and business intelligence capabilities were things that were dependent on resources, and those are resources that you don't currently have. And so you're going to need to figure out a way to get those resources in place. So we're not saying that data is not a priority. Data is important, and wherever we're working in this area, we need to be working smart and working towards reusable services and these types of things. But as I've said, and I think the INRM report also points out, there are some other priorities that you need to tackle. And the basic priority is that without core data around your work and asset management processes or around your land development and permitting processes and licensing processes, then that's the raw material for any sort of data strategy, data work. So that's the area that you're working on now, and that's what we're recommending, is really that we invest resources in those areas, build those foundations, and once that's achieved, then we can begin to focus more attention towards the I think behind, but we're not necessarily de-emphasizing, we're prioritizing, and there's some areas that we need to prioritize before we get to some of the data work.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Councillor McConkey.
So, Mr. Perry, if I could just try to at least what I've just heard, that you think that the future service of the city is better to have the digitization of the maps and the other certain services, but the actual data from our records is not as important? Have I kind of...
It's not that it's not as important, it's that you don't have some of the data until you've digitized those processes. So I think Councillor Giberson talked to paper and PDF forms and things like that. If the content that you're collecting is not in digitized form, then you're in no shape to start analyzing the data because you don't really have the data. So what we're talking about, and we sort of lay out in the strategy here, that there's a number of layers to technology. There's an infrastructure layer, then there's the business solutions that run your business processes, and the data layer sits on top of those two layers. And if you have unreliable or not fully developed or fully implemented infrastructure, then that's going to, like the foundations of a house, it's going to undermine the layers that sit on top of it. So what we're saying is that actually we've got some gaps in our business solutions areas that need to be addressed. And we need to draft in resources to help us deliver those successfully. Once we've got that solidly addressed, then we can turn our resource attention towards our data layer. So that's what we're saying. We're not saying that it's that data is not important. Huge value in data, huge power in data, and huge opportunities for your organization to use data to inform the way that the organization operates, to identify efficiencies and improvements. There's just tremendous opportunity. But as we've pointed out, because we're behind on some other things, we need to draft our resources towards addressing those gaps first.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Councillor McConkey. Any further questions?
I do. When we talk about the 23 full-time equivalents, I think you've also mentioned that we have a staffing problem in that we don't have a succession plan. There's a number of retirees. Have you any idea how many of those 23 full-time equivalents in the near future you were saying planning on retirement? Because I think a lot. Sorry, the bulk is talking about basically requiring more staff in the department. So I'm just curious, of those 23, what are we expecting number-wise to have a change?
So without identifying individuals, I think we're in the sort of 4 or 5 range of the 23. One of the people that we were talking about has retired already since we were talking about this strategy, and really it's the senior staff within the team and people that have, long history and long knowledge within the organization about systems, how they operate, how they integrate. So there's a fairly significant risk of a loss of institutional knowledge.
Thank you. On the page before, which is page 26 of the report, 19 of your submission, last paragraph, you give some numbers there in terms of the capital budget that I was really surprised because the 2019 capital budget, you have down as 62 million, and I don't recall it being that high. You were comparing, the percentage of the IT budget with the total capital budget, the money spent in 2019. And of that 1,445,000 that you said was capital budget for 2019, that sounds familiar, but our total capital budget in 2019, 26, reading it backwards, 62, my dyslexia. If I could just have confirmation on that, are you where you got that figure from? Was that from finance?
Yes, that's correct. I believe. I think I may pass that to Tracy and Dave Malby to answer that question. The city supplied us that information, yes.
Commissioner, could you help the councillor with her query?
Just one moment, please, Councilor Marks.
Thank you. Committee's indulgence, please.
We're just opening the 2019 capital budget.
When you're ready, Commissioner.
Thank you. So, for you, Chair Mark, so we just double checked the 2019 capital budget, and it appears that it's 1,115,000. So we have to go back to see why there's a difference of that 300,000.
Would you like to add any further, Commissioner, or are we waiting for Councillor McConkey's follow-up?
I think we're waiting for additional questions because that's all the information that we can provide at this time.
Thank you. Councillor McConkey?
Thank you. I don't know when I was put on mute. I was saying to Commissioner Adams, it wasn't specific to the amount spent on IT. was questioning in this report, which is 62 million of capital budget projects high. But I just have one more question at this point then, I guess, Mr. Perry. On page 42 of the report, which is page 35 of your submission, you talk about the city having leveraged an EOC dashboard. Who did we leverage that from or with?
Was your question directed at Mr. Perry or the Commissioner, Councillor, just for clarity?
Mr. Perry.
Mr. Perry, did you comprehend Councillor McConkey's question?
Yeah, so this is Emergency Operations Center dashboard, and my recollection of the actual product name is not coming to me right this second. I don't know if Commissioner Adams, yeah, can answer that question.
Councillor McConkey? I'm sorry. Commissioner Adams, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
And so staff internally wrote that dashboard.
Councillor McConkey?
Thank you, but I was asking when it's written that we've leveraged it. I was just assuming then that we've partnered in some way when we've leveraged it, taking it from another department, utilizing it. I mean, it sounds good that we can maybe make further use of it as the paragraph goes on. It's just where did it come from with these? So it's something that city staff knows, because the integrated ArcGIS, it's a company that provides a lot of opportunities for, development in terms of IT. And I just wondered, is that one of our partners now, ArcGIS?
So just in answer to that, ArcGIS is a product from a company called Esri. It's your GIS platform. And really it's a way of visualizing and representing information spatially on a map, and querying and analyzing distributions and things like that. So the GIS platform that you have actually is a very robust platform, and you can integrate it, and it is integrated into a number of your key systems. So CityView and Maximo are integrated with the ArcGIS platform, and increasingly as you go forward, you'll use that platform more and more, integrating it into business intelligence, reporting, and analysis tools.
Councillor McConkey? Councillor McConkey, are you there?
I was trying to myself, but I have to wait. Yes, I looked it up online. The other company that you say ArcGIS is under, it looks like a fantastic opportunity in a lot of areas. Was it one that you're suggesting that we might look at for other, in terms of a partner in other areas?
Yeah, very much so. It's one of your core platforms at the city. A huge proportion of the work that the city does is related to location. So be that, addresses that we're serving, or pipes that we're dealing with, or roadways that we're dealing with. And so GIS is a really critical part. That's one of the big thrusts of the strategy, is actually, when we get to our data work, one of the things, and this is where the information records management strategy and the IT strategy align, we're recommending that you move to have a GIS and data manager who can run that program and really leverage those types of tools. And we do think there's tremendous opportunity throughout the organization to really leverage.
Councillor.
Thank you. So when I looked it up, the ArcGIS, you mentioned the name of the umbrella company that it falls under. I just didn't know how to pronounce it. It was EIO something.
ESRI is the company.
ESRI, yeah. So they seem to provide, a wealth of different types of services. So when you're talking about, moving from our, I think you had the diagram there where we're, doing just support and we want to partner. That was one that looked pretty promising. But my last question, I just cut it really short here. It was good to hear the comments from the public when you did the survey. But anywhere along the way, did anybody talk about text messaging, the city getting a little bit more capability for texting? Because in my previous line of work, and I'm sure a lot of others might find the same, people are using text messaging a lot more than email or phone calls. Texting is kind of taken over in a lot of respects for communication. And I don't know if the city has looked at that or if you've been aware of any possibilities of introducing text messaging into, say, Service Oshawa and the Lagan.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think that supporting various channels is critically important, and different people like to use different channels. Some people like to use email, some people like to use text messages, some people like to use live chat, which you've introduced, for instance. And I think good customer service is all about offering choice and choice to the customer about how they interact with the city. And so, offering those types of options, how would you like to connect with your city? How would you like to hear updates about this? We should absolutely be offering options around those things. So that's part of, again, the sort of the plan for enhancing digital services is to look more closely at what customer expectations are, what customer preferences are, and make sure that we match the services that we deliver to those needs. So I would agree that text messaging is part of a suite of notification and communication and engagement methods that that the city as an organization needs to embrace.
Councillor, does that conclude your questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Perry. You take care.
Thank you very much. I will now move to Councillor Giverson, who I understand has some questions on the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair Marks. Just one question that I would like to hear both from Mr. Perry, if I could, as well as the Commissioner. The timeline that's provided later in the report to improve our IT services, to remedy the gaps, to get us into that best practices, maybe leader territory someday. Would you consider this to be an aggressive or ambitious timeline, or a moderate timeline, or a conservative timeline?
Was that directed at Mr. Perry, Councillor Giverson, or the Commissioner?
I think I'd like to hear from Mr. Perry first on that, and I would be interested to hear the Commissioner's take on it as well.
Thank you. Mr. Perry?
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable time frame if we can get the commitment that is required to achieve it. I think you referenced past performance and the previous decade of challenge, I think. And if we continue with that approach, then the city is unlikely to make rapid progress against the strategy that we've outlined. But given commitment from council, from CLT, and throughout the organization, I think this is realistic and achievable, but it is dependent absolutely on investment. And so I think that's the point at which it really hinges. So I would say, in the context of previous performance and the history, then this will be a challenging plan to achieve. If we can double down in terms of commitment and effort, then it is achievable. So I think that's how I'd characterize that. Is that, pass back to Councillor Adams.
Councillor Giberson?
Thank you, that's helpful. I would love to hear the commissioner's view on this as well. Thank you, same question.
Commissioner, would you like the question repeated, or do you have an understanding?
Thank you, Chair Marks. I have a good understanding of the question, and thank you for it. So I echo Ben's comments as well. It is achievable. And however, you noticed in the report that we will be coming to council, so we will be providing those regular updates. I think in the past plan was a good plan, but it didn't really advance because it wasn't, there was no line of sight in terms of the moving forward of some of those action items in that plan. What I like about this strategic plan is that there's very specific actionable items with timelines, and we will be coming to council frequently to receive their approval in their direction in terms of those priorities. So I like what's been laid out, and I think it's achievable as long as we have the appropriate resources, both financial as well as human resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perry. Commissioner, Councillor Giberson.
Thank you. I thank you both for your answers, and I greatly look forward to seeing this implemented across the corporation in the months and years to come. So thank you for the work done on this and the work that is coming in the future.
Thank you. I will invoke a small pause if anyone would wish to comment or have any other further questions on Corp 2017. Seeing none, we will move to vote. Any in opposition of the recommendation, please speak. Hearing none, thank you very much. That recommendation is carried. Moving to Corp 2018, and I look to Councillor Neal to propose a motion for the floor, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make the motion that that this item be referred back to staff to investigate and report back as to how this
So I will ask the members of the committee. Councillor Neal, is it your prerogative to have a recorded vote?
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, just give us a moment to cue the recorded vote function. One moment. Go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Councillor Neal,
Yes.
Councillor Giberson,
No.
Councillor Hurst,
No.
Councillor Nicholson,
No.
Mayor Carter,
No.
Chair Marks.
No. That motion is defeated. Members of the committee, can I have the floor, please?
Yeah, if I could make a motion then to refer this to the 2021 budget.
Same rules. There's this motion. We will then, you looking for a recorded vote again, Councillor Neal?
No, it's all right. It's just,
No, it's okay. If we are ready, Madam Clerk, can I have any opposition to the referral motion, please?
Nicholson opposed. Carter opposed.
That's a Nicholson opposed, Carter opposed.
Councillor Giberson opposed.
Councillor Giberson is opposed. I'm in the chamber and I can confirm that Councillor Hurst, who I cannot hear. Is there a way you can fix your function there, Councillor Hurst?
Yeah,
Okay, there you go.
okay.
You are in opposition. Councillor Hurst is in opposition. That motion to refer to staff is defeated. Members of the committee, can somebody give me a motion on Corp 2018?
Nicholson, move the recommendation.
Oh, Counselor Gray wants to talk to it.
I have a recommendation from Councillor Nicholson to receive for information, and that is the motion that I will accept. Councillor Nicholson, do you wish to speak on the motion?
Thank you. I think it speaks for itself. Thank you.
Recorded vote. Councillor Neal, recorded vote.
Thank you very much. At the appropriate time, I see Councillor Gray would like to comment on this. Councillor Gray, good morning. Councillor Gray,
Yes, I'm here.
did you have comments on the recommendation?
Oh, I sure did. I had already started. I guess I wasn't unmuted at the time.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
First question under financial implications, page 332. It indicates that the cost would be about $250,000 a year, I think is the grand total. Now, I'm just curious, are those numbers, are they already in the budget? In other words, somebody from the clerk's department would be, and that was my phone ring, I just switched it off, thanks, would that include existing staff? And I want to give you, in another committee, we learned that, you know, something we had a cost estimate putting in as financial implications, when in fact a lot of it would have been covered by existing staff. So I'm just trying to get a handle on the $250,000 number. Can somebody answer that for me?
I will direct attention to the Commissioner. Commissioner, is there someone you would like to delegate this to, or could you help Councillor Gray with this question?
Through you, Chair Marks, to Councillor Gray. So that 250,000 does not include existing city clerk staff. They do not have the capacity at this time to take on this project. If this is a priority of council, then we would need to hire someone to administer this registry. And that's consistent with other municipalities, that you have an administrator that would manage the whole program.
I'm sure back on there. My microphone's back on now.
Councillor Gray, you're back. Yep.
And so I'm now looking at page 340, and it's the regional report. When they had this issue come before them, it indicated that you need a clerk, potentially an integrity commissioner, and other staffing. And so I guess what the commissioner has just said is that with the workload of the existing staff, they simply don't have the capacity at this time to handle this function in-house without it costing $250,000. Is that correct?
Through Chair Marks to Councillor Gray, that's correct.
Now, presently under the gifts policy, I believe that, does that also apply to staff?
Through Chair Marks to Councillor Gray, I'm just double checking. I believe it does. Under our code of conduct, yes.
As well.
Yes.
Okay.
We do have that, yes.
And just to reiterate on the gifts policy, so it's up to each member of council if they got invited out to dinner, or if they got invited to a future hockey game or basketball game, it's up to them to file with the clerk that they received this benefit. Is that still the current system?
Correct.
And at present time, does anybody, do we receive anybody's filing, or just we're not getting any gifts?
Through the Chair Marks to Councillor Gray, at this point in time, the city clerk has not received any filings.
I guess the issue I have, and it's, I think we've got to be ever mindful. The federal and the provincial governments have brought in, these types of regulations because in some cases the decisions that we make are big bucks. And I think we've all come across the slick salespeople, smooth as glass, and they can sell just a horrible product just because it's part of them, their image, their deportment, and so I think I look back on the MFP scandal that hit Toronto with the computer leasing and things of that nature, and it really pointed out how you can be very vulnerable if you get those high pressure, hey, friend of a friend, and so having some sort of protections put into the municipality, I think, is important. Do you feel at this time that there are sufficient protections so that the high-pitched sales reps are getting proper scrutiny and not, it's essentially at the end of the day leaving the municipality vulnerable like Toronto found itself?
Sorry, Councillor Gray, was that a question directed at Commissioner Adams? Commissioner Adams?
Through Chair Marks to Councillor Gray. So the report did outline some existing accountability and transparency measures that do exist. So we referenced the Code of Conduct, the Integrity Commissioner Services, Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, Declaration of Interest Registry, Purchasing Bylaw, and Accountancy Bylaw. So those tools already exist, as well as the accountability and transparency policy. But what you're referring to regarding the issue in Toronto, I would have to defer to legal on that.
Okay, because I think the MFP scandal changed the municipal world because it wasn't just politicians getting too close. There was staff as well. And I think to have adequate protections in place, we need to make sure that there's that total awareness of what you can get yourself into. That MFP scandal was not a pretty sight. And certainly Justice Bellamy, when she wrote a report, I actually read it, the entire report, just because it was such a good read. But I guess that's etched into my mind now, and the protections that we have to have in place. I think an integrity commissioner, well, I accept the fact that it's very expensive. I don't think we should leave it entirely. I think having a lobbyist registry, I think, would help us. But I also understand the times that we're living in. And so I can accept the fact that we're not going to do it right away. But I just think to make sure those protections are in place at some point when it's going to be a little more manageable, because right now we still don't know where we're going to fall after all this COVID-19 and how long we're going to be under partial lockdown. So I can accept the recommendation at this time, but I don't think this council should park it permanently and just say absolutely no to it. I think there are protections involved, and I see that Mississauga turned it down, but yet Peel Region did adopt the policy. And I guess the last, it won't be a question because I've already spoken, but it'd be very interesting to find out what the other municipalities, the 5 that have implemented this, what it actually cost. It would be very helpful in the future when we can revisit this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Next on the speakers list, I have Councillor Giberson, followed by Councillor Neal. Councillor Giberson.
Thank you, Chair Marks. For the recommendation, it was briefly touched on by the commissioner that there are other mechanisms of accountability and transparency that are in place. There's a council code of conduct. We have the Integrity Commissioner Services. We're bound by the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. There's a declaration of interest registry. We have a purchasing bylaw, which is oftentimes the domain that these sticky issues arise. And I think the famous one is the one that Councillor Gray just referenced, and others of that sort. We have our procedure bylaw. So, you know, I don't know that there is ever a perfect way of ensuring full accountability and full transparency. It requires the good faith and intent to act in the best interest of those that we represent at all times on any issue. I'm not categorically against a lobbyist registry. However, when we look at the comparators that were examined, we see that the municipalities that implemented one are much, much larger. And there are municipalities that are larger still than us that looked at it and chose not to implement it. And I think that there are, you know, there may be some lessons in that, and we have, there are lobbying laws and requirements at provincial and federal government levels. And I think one of the clear reasons for that is that as the size of the government grows, the potential for maybe some of the undesirable outcomes of lobbying grows along with it. And it becomes a greater challenge due to the size to monitor. And when I say monitor, I mean for citizens, for politicians, for staff, for interest groups, for stakeholders, for advocates. It becomes harder to monitor as the size of a government grows. So is it that we are not yet at the size to be looking at a lobbyist registry? Maybe not necessarily. I think what I would prefer to see advocated for here in our region is that if we are ever to be taking a serious look at this, that it be something that is run through a registrar or a directorate at the regional level, and local municipalities, lower tier municipalities, then have a look at opting in to that resource there and share the resources to administer a lobbyist registry, and make the cost and the resource and staff resource intensity of it shared across the region amongst the municipalities. And it would help in terms of efficiency, because many of the groups and interests that are lobbying Oshawa City Council are likely also lobbying Whitby Town Council and Scugog and others, as well as the region. So there may be an opportunity for efficiency in the future there. I know that Regional Council recently declined to proceed with one. Maybe it should, at a future date, be looked at again. But I am concerned about the potential to bog things down when it's at a smaller level. It's a little bit harder to hide, and I shouldn't say a little bit harder. I think it's quite a bit harder to hide the goings on. We know of lobbyist groups that are very out in the open. You know, we have the Built group that their responsibility for their trade, their sector, is to bring forth their concerns, which is lobbying by any definition, and that's no secret. It's very visible. But I also look, for instance, at the example in the City of Toronto, where their lobbying registrar and system in place also considers the fact that each individual city councillor in Toronto, they have a staff, each to their own, who are acting as a as sort of a first point of contact for anyone trying to reach politicians. So they have that administrative support that smaller municipalities don't have. And, you know, I think that we've only calculated in this, and I could be wrong, and I stand to be corrected, but is it possible that our calculations here are just looking at some points of staff involvement and new staff involvement that are easy to measure? There may be other ones that are harder to measure at this point, and it's things like that where there may be an increased demand on the councillors' offices with the limited administrative support that we have that may come into play as well too. So I would enter regional level, and then provides lower tier municipalities the opportunity to get involved at whatever level they would choose to. So those are my comments, and I'll be supporting the recommended motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Guyverson. Councillor Neal.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In regards to this item, what brings to my mind is the replacing of plastic water connections that will cost Durham, and has and will, millions of dollars. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the polybutylene water service connections in Durham region. Well, they seem to be, we don't even have to go to Toronto to see a complete failure in regards to looking after taxpayers' money. This polybutylene or polypiping was used in the late 70s and early 80s, connecting water mains from streets to, I guess, the shut-off valves. Have you seen the streets in Oshawa being torn up? Well, that's because of that. It's going to be decades, and in 2010, region budgeting about $3.6 million to replace even more connections. So, I mean, this program has been going on and on. 255 to be done in Oshawa this year. How would you like to have a wedding on your street, knowing that the polybutylene, your whole street was going to be torn up, so you'd have to plan something else around that. So, I mean, it's not only been costly, and as Cliff Curtis once said, I have 3 crews working full-time to fix breaks, and at the current pace, it could be 120 years before all these connections are replaced. So, having said that, yeah, who got lobbied on that one? It was the region of Durham. Exactly the region of Durham. And Oshawa's had to suck it up and close streets down. And it's been a mess for our citizens throughout the whole city of Oshawa because of it. So that's just one example. I got more. But this is a question through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk. If I have a complaint about a lobbyist, who do I see as of today? If I leave after this meeting to see somebody, who do I go and see? And please don't say the police. So that's my question, and I'll be asking for a recorded vote.
Turning to Commissioner Adams. Commissioner Adams, is there anyone listening in from the staff that could assist Councillor Neal with his query about a complaint regarding a lobbyist?
For you, Councillor Marks, I would ask Mr. Yoon to comment on that question.
Mr. Yoon, good morning. Thank you for being in attendance.
And just before Mr. Yoon chimes in, I've already talked to him months before about this, so just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Well, you obviously want to hear the answer again. So, Mr. Yoon, could you possibly help Mr. Neal with his question?
Morning. Through you, Chair Marks, to the Council's question. As already provided in the report, there are a number of accountability transparency measures that are in place, which would assist any councillor looking for some sort of assistance, such as a council code of conduct, as well as a Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and so on. So there are at least some procedural measures that would at least be able to assist the councillor. Having said, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Councillor Neal?
So who do I go and see, like, right after this? Because it doesn't look like anyone's interested in fixing what Councillor Gray was talking about. What I just finished talking about is two examples of, like, the last one I talked about is huge. So who do I go and see? Who's the person? Like, can you put a face to this? Or I hope I'm not going to get...
I'll send it back to Councillor Yoon, but it sounds like your query is more relevant at the region, given that you're...
No, I'm talking about the city of Oshawa. It's not relevant at the region. Not the example I have, but...
Okay, Mr. Yoon, again, I look to you to answer or help Councillor Neal with his query.
Through the chair, I think this is a process that I would defer to Commissioner Adams and to the clerk, but my understanding is that based on the code of conduct, this would be facilitated in part by the clerk, and it may also be there might be some oversight by the integrity commissioner as well.
Councillor Neal?
Okay, so I could go and see Mary Medeiros and then possibly Mr. Giorno after that. Is that correct?
I think that was something that Mr. Yoon was alleging to, but perhaps we could confirm with the city clerk, Ms. Medeiros, if she's listening, and of course, Commissioner Adams. Is there anyone that can help Councillor Neary with his query? Thank you.
For you, Councillor Marks, yes. Councillor Neal can reach out to our city clerk. Thank you.
Well, that would work if we're not interested in doing a formal procedure, but I really don't want to waste anybody's time by looking into a code of conduct or seeing an integrity commissioner when it doesn't apply. And I mean, that's what I wanted to ask here today, if this was voted down, is what's the next step? If there is a relief valve for such a thing, then, and when I read the report, you can do this and you can do that. Well, let's put it to the test then. Because I got one that I believe fits right in with lobbyists and crossing the line. So they got away with it in Durham Region. They got away with it in Toronto. So I mean, hopefully we can stop it here somehow. I mean, I've tried, so I'll just ask for a recorded vote on this issue and the report itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments on report 2018? Madam Clerk, seeing none. Councillor Neal has asked for a recorded vote. Bear with us a moment while the clerk gets established. Thank you.
Councillor Neal?
To receive for information? No.
Yes, the vote is to receive for information.
No.
Councillor Giberson?
Yes.
Councillor Hurst?
Yes.
Councillor Nicholson?
Yes.
Mayor Carter?
Yes.
Councillor Marks?
Yes. That motion and the recommendation are carried. Thank you. We now are moving on to items to be introduced by councillors. I will pause a brief moment if anyone would like to introduce an item. Seeing none, I now look to members of the committee for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Nicholson, adjourn.
Councillor Nicholson has asked for a motion to adjourn. Any opposed to the motion? Hearing none, thank you very much. Members of the committee staff, have a nice